Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. You've heard a lot about gridlock in Congress over what to do about security at the U.S. southern border and about defense spending for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. A border deal and foreign aid package touted as bipartisan failed to advance in the Senate, and the House Speaker said at the time if it made it to the House, it would be dead on arrival, largely because of opposition from former President Donald Trump, who called it a disaster. Then, more recently, a foreign aid-only bill passed the Senate, but as of Thursday, hasn't made it to a House vote. But now, a new bipartisan bill has emerged in the House, and it's co-sponsored by both the Republican and Democrat from the Pacific Northwest. Oregon's 5th District Republican Congresswoman Lori Chavez-Dreamer and Southwest Washington's District 3 Democratic Representative Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez have joined several other congressional members, both Democrats and Republicans, in sponsoring the bill. It's called the Defending Borders, Defending Democracies Act. For 1 year, the legislation would provide necessary authority to secure the border and defense-only assistance to support Israel, Taiwan, and Ukraine. In this episode of Straight Talk, we're pleased to be joined by both Congresswomen to tell us what's in the bill, what's at stake, and why they joined forces to try to get it passed. Welcome to my guests, Representatives Lori Chavez-Dreamer and Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez. Welcome back to Straight Talk. It's so nice to have you here.
Thanks, Laurel. Good to be here.
This seems so unusual. We all hear a lot about gridlock and dysfunction in Congress, a lack of bipartisanship, business grinding to a halt. How did this happen that you came together to work on this bill? Let me start with this Congressman.
Well, the number of migrants unlawfully crossing the southern border has reached an all-time high in December. And this is something that concerns both of us. And so we have both talked informally about how important support for military aid has been and also the border issue. And so when we saw the chance to find a way around bipartisan gridlock in the Senate and on the House, we got together and co-led this legislation.
Congresswoman Chavez-Dreamer, how does it feel to be working with your Democratic colleague?
Well, it's quite frankly easy. We've gotten to know each other over the last year, certainly. We know that we have the same values in the Pacific Northwest. We recognize what's happening on the southern border and how that's affecting Oregon and Washington. When we drill down, we're talking about the fentanyl crisis and the overdose. While we're not a border state, we recognize the devastation it can have on the streets for our young people, in our school system, for families worried about that. So that's one major issue. We also recognize on a national security level what can happen when dictators take over, like Putin in Ukraine. What we don't want to see is China to be aggressive with Taiwan, and we want to make sure that Israel can defend itself against Iran. So those kind of things come together. And then when we're working together in the problem solvers group, we see each other. There's lots of Democrats and Republicans who work together. I'm proud to serve on problem solvers, and I know Maria is too. And it's when these type of issues come together that we say, wait, we can be pragmatic, thoughtful thinkers. That's why we're elected to our districts. So for me to work with Marie to talk about what's the values are for Oregon and Washington, it's time to constituents want us to do something, not just sit back and wait. We can't continue to do that. We're freshmen, but we have voices, and we're going to make sure we exercise those voices for the people who elected us.
I mentioned earlier the foreign aid bill that passed the Senate, so we have the competing bill that's sort of making its way through the House. This bill joins the two issues together, border security and foreign aid. Why join these two issues together, Congresswoman?
Well, I think when you say that you respect borders and that a border is the obligation of a government to secure, that means that we also recognize that Ukraine has a right to defend its border. And frankly, our administration has failed to get a handle on the crisis. We've seen it turned into this football that is really disappointing because the impacts are so real and real human cost in not having a secure southern border for us, and we see the suffering in Ukraine, and I think there's sometimes there can be this thing of like, you're freshmen, don't worry about it, let leadership handle it, and I didn't put my life in a blender to wait around for somebody else to fix this. It's very serious and very real to both of us.
Well, Congresswoman Chavez-Dreamer, let's drill down on what is happening at the southern border and how you see it impacting the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, what we hear oftentimes is people are truly concerned about operational control. We can see, hundreds of thousands of migrants coming to our country. We know that people come to this country for various reasons, asylum seekers, religious persecution. We recognize that. But what we now do not have is any operational control to know who's coming across the border. And when again, drugs and the cartels are ruling the day, and we have human trafficking and sex trafficking, and we have to get control of that border. So when we're talking bipartisan, we want to make sure that bills are simple. You mentioned earlier just the foreign aid bill being a simple solo bill. But we also recognize we're in a divided Congress and we have a very slim majority each way. And when we talk about these things, it's better on a timing issue as well as negotiating issue. We can keep both sides simple, but again, protecting our border as well as other borders. This bill came together with bipartisanship. Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick came together with Jared Golden and said, wait a minute, take a look at this bill. Let's get some other sponsors. There was 4 and 4 as original co-sponsors, and now we're going to get more on, because right now it's the only bill in the House. It's the only bill, bipartisan bill, that addresses both issues. And if we want something done, we have to get the votes. It's just that simple. So border security for us in the United States gets Republican votes for sure, and Democratic votes, and the opposite side of that, foreign aid and making sure they can secure their borders will get Democratic votes, and that's how we move it forward.
Well, let's look at what's in the border part of the bill. Here's some of the language that's in the bill. It requires the Secretary of Homeland Security to suspend the entry of inadmissible migrants at a U.S. land or maritime border if the Secretary determines it's necessary to achieve operational control of the southern border. It requires an immigration officer who determines that a migrant arriving in the U.S. or along the southern border is inadmissible and to be detained and expelled to Mexico or their nation of origin, birth, or residence without further hearing or review, and implements a remain in Mexico policy for 1 year by requiring illegal immigrants seeking admission, including asylum, to return to that territory pending proceedings for the adjudication of their status. Representative Gluesenkamp-Perez, how do you see this helping stem the fentanyl crisis that we see in the Pacific Northwest?
Well, the Remain in Mexico policy, Title 42, Congress enacted that in 1996. Presidents of both parties have used it. And in Washington last year, we had over 1,800 people die from fentanyl. And in communities like mine, I think it's hitting harder than others. And so it's personal. Like, we all know someone who has died, or, even if you don't know that you know, someone that you know has died. Mm-hmm. And it's a crisis, and we cannot wait. And, by gaining operational control, by knowing who is coming in and out, which I think is actually a very low barrier. Like, we should know who is coming in and out. I think you're able to stem the flow of fentanyl and create less power in human trafficking and coyotes who are using the between ports.
Representative Chavez-Dreamer, let me ask you a little bit more about Remain in Mexico, because that has been political in the past. It was originally implemented in January of 2019 by then President Trump, and it required migrants seeking asylum to stay in Mexico until their U.S. immigration court date, which can be a while. And human rights groups say it exposes migrants to attacks while they wait for those proceedings. And then President Biden has called it inhumane. Mexico is opposed to it. Why do you want to see it as part of this bill?
Well, we can see what's happening, whether it's the former president, the current president. Right now, we don't see that operational control. Again, it's out of control, and we have to get a hold of that. What we're asking is that they remain in their home countries, and if it's in Mexico, remain in Mexico policy, or the Title 42, which was enacted during the COVID era. We're asking for really a pause and to say, let's work with the Mexican government, and it will be up to this administration to determine what that looks like and put the pressure there. Because they're experiencing that on their southern borders, whether they're coming in through other countries. And what we're recognizing is that we're doing ourselves no favors here in the state of Oregon. Really with Measure 110 and decriminalizing the use of hard drugs didn't do us any favors. Now we're seeing somewhat of a fix at our Oregon legislature. But when you have those pills on the streets for 80 cents a pill, and our young people are not recognizing just how devastating that can be, and then that one pill will kill them on the streets. And then we have our first responders saying, we're pushing Narcan at 2 and 3 pushes at a time to save those children. I mean, we can't have this anymore. We can't have 1,500 to 1,600% increase in overdose deaths. I mean, this is something that we should all be standing up for. And as a mom of 29-year-old twin girls, and as a new mom of a new young little boy, this should be first and foremost what we should stand up for. It is not a partisan issue. This should be a bipartisan issue, and this is one way we can get a hold of that.
And you mentioned Title 42. Just want to bring that up because that's included in the bill too.
Yep.
And we'll talk a little bit about what that is. It allows the U.S. government to expel those seeking asylum back to their home countries or Mexico if there was a danger of introducing communicable diseases. And it did start during the COVID era to try to protect people from coronavirus impacted areas coming into the country. And there were 1.8 million expulsions during that time. It was discontinued in April of 2022 at the end of the pandemic. Why do you want to see, Representative Gluesenkamp-Perez, why do you want to see it re-implemented?
Well, like I said, the policy of having people apply for asylum in their home countries or in Mexico was actually originally used in 1996. Like, Trump really likes to brand things, but this is actually an idea that we have used for a long time to gain operational control. And so I think that it gives people with very clear asylum cases a faster track to having a more quick resolution, and it incentivizes people to take slowly and not abuse the asylum process while they're in their home countries.
Well, let's talk now about the foreign aid portion of the bill. It's the defending democracies portion. What do you think, Representative, is at stake right now when we look at foreign aid?
Yeah, I don't know if I have to say what I think, because I think we can see it. We can see what's been happening in Ukraine, and if we think that Putin's going to stop, he's not if we don't help our allies. This is often recognized that, you know, America is number one in the world in leadership. That people do look to America to say, we've been protecting and supporting our allies for years. I recognize that people want not a blank check, and they want to have oversight and see where the money's going. And we don't want to have any nefarious behavior with taking that money and not, when will the war end? But if we don't stand up to that, you know who's watching? China. China's watching, and they're putting the pressure on Taiwan. Iran is watching, and we can see what's happening in Israel. We recognize that we are in a national security crisis, but this foreign aid is important to these democracies. I mean, when we look at even Israel in the Middle East, they're a democracy in the Middle East who has the same values as America. Ukraine has a right to defend themselves as well. So this was important. I think that this package offers a little over $66 billion. Yes, is it a high price tag? Sure it is. But I think that that's the right thing to do. And there's a lot of members of Congress who would agree with both of us on this package.
And here's a look at the money that is in the bill. There's over $47 billion to support the defense of Ukraine, over $10 billion to support the defense of Israel, almost $5 billion to support U.S. and allied deterrence operations in the Indo-Pacific, and $8 billion for the Department of Defense to conduct oversight of Ukraine funds and requires a report to Congress within 90 days. Sponsors of the bill also, Representative Gluesenkamp-Perez, say that this will also help the U.S. as far as manufacturing. So a lot of the money will stay in this country. Can you speak to that?
That's right. I mean, we are not talking about sending $80 billion out to somebody with a clipboard, right? This is about American manufacturing of munitions. That is where the vast majority of this money is going to stay. And when you think about deterrence on a global scale of our enemies attacking us or our allies, it is predicated on having a strong munitions and national manufacturing capacity. And that's what I think is so powerful about this. You know, there's this theory of escalation, and it's basically the idea is like when you see two primates fight, if one of them just walks away from an attack, the other one knows that there's no cost to attacking, and the whole colony knows there's no cost to attacking. And so violence actually goes way up in the colony if they start just walking away. And I think that the cost here is real, but bad actors are watching everywhere what happens in Ukraine. Like, are we going to give them the tools to defend themselves, or is this going to, expand to Moldova and Georgia and Poland? What's going to happen in Taiwan? And I think that's why, you wouldn't say, I can't afford the cost of a fire extinguisher, so I'm going to let the whole building burn, right? Like, you having a posture of proactive work, I think, is what the America that we believe in, and we know that it is in the best interest of global security to prevent these kinds of violent actors before they have this high level of success. And feedback loop.
Let me ask you about humanitarian aid, because a lot of Americans want to see more humanitarian aid from the U.S. to Palestinians in the Gaza area. Does your bill include any humanitarian aid, or might it possibly include humanitarian aid, Representative?
Yeah, it might. We're open to those amendments, because what will happen in the process-wise, we have this bill on the floor as a discharge petition. And a discharge petition means that we're bypassing the rules to go around really the normal process, and then members can sign on. When those signatures reach 218 signatures, then they'll put it forward to the floor when the calendar allows. I mean, there's a whole, process to that, and then amendments can come forward. And there's been some conversation about that. Right now, what we know, at least as far as Ukraine goes in the NATO, our NATO partners, oftentimes humanitarian aid is there. What we also have to remember is that we want to keep this bill as simple as possible to have a conversation. So we'll move through that conversation as it goes through the floor, but specifically what we want, the goal, at least I know for Marie and I and for the original co-sponsors, is what can get the votes to get this done so we can move forward. And to remind everybody, this is a 1-year time frame. We're not talking to solve all the issues, but we can't wait any longer. I mean, Ukraine is at their breaking point. Israel is very concerned. We just have to make sure that we secure that southern border. I've been to the border twice. I've been down in Texas and I've been down to Arizona. If you talk to the members there, Democrat or Republican, they need help now. We can't wait any longer.
Let me talk about some of the people that have signed on to the bill. You mentioned Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, the Republican from Pennsylvania, leading the way, the co-chair of the Moderate Problem Solvers Caucus. You're both members. He's former FBI, was stationed in Kyiv in Ukraine before coming to Congress. Democrat Jared Golden from Maine, Republican Don Macon of Nebraska, Democrat Ed Case from Hawaii, Republican Mike Lawler from New York, and Democrat Jim Costa from California. And you recently attended a news conference to introduce this bill. Let's listen to a clip from Representative Fitzpatrick.
We just want the problem solved. This is not a transportation bill. This is not the naming of a post office. This is literally U.S. domestic security and world peace on the line here. We felt that we needed to step up and offer a solution to show the intersection of where Democrats and Republicans, reasonable members of this chamber, can agree. Both on border security and on funding our allies overseas.
And quickly, before we go to a break, Representative, what is on the line, do you think, here, if this bill or something like it doesn't pass?
Well, I certainly know my style of work. I'm not going to give up here if we don't get there. And I know that, the problem solvers, people are on problem solvers to solve problems. It doesn't do us any good to go to Washington, D.C. and be a part of a caucus that doesn't get done. So we'll put the pressure where we need to put the pressure. I'll talk to my colleagues. I know Marie will talk to her colleagues. But we do recognize we are at a time where we have to make a move. We cannot continue to keep pushing this off for weeks on end when our border's at risk and their borders are at risk. So this is what we're about. This is what America's about. And I'm going to do everything I can to get it across the finish line.